from things that would harm them. You see, we've got to make sure that our shepherds are protecting sheep from wolves. And then verse 3, Paul contrasts the Corinthians' inaction with the fact that even though he wasn't there, he had cast judgment on this issue. Paul was willing to confront the problem and wasn't complacent about it, as I later. In verses 4 through 5, we see that Paul is saying in these verses that when the Corinthians gather, they should remove this particular individual. And it's interesting because the phrase "to deliver such an one to Satan," apparently we can discern, according to Morris's commentary, would refer to the fact that outside the church is a region where Satan holds sway. We either belong to God or Satan. You cannot serve two masters. You must choose who you will serve. And this man's punishment was given in this passage with hopes that he would return back with a repentant heart eventually. And then let's go to verses 6 through 8. In verse 6 it says, "Your glorying is not good." Pardon me, I know my Bible is way over there. "Your glorying is not good. Know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump? Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened, for even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So we see in verse 6 that Paul mentions that their glorying isn't good. This meant they weren't confident in the right things. Our confidence should be in Jesus Christ. We shouldn't be comfortable with sin, much less proud of it. And leaven is yeast, which would cause bread to rise. It only took a little to make it puff up. But then we see what this is attributing to, and an illustration of in verse 7, it begins to kind of build this illustration that Paul is making. Verse 7 refers to the Old Testament sacrifice of Passover, which was a shadow of what Jesus came to do. In the Old Testament, when Israelites were about to be delivered out of the hands of the Egyptians, where they had been slaves in Egypt, it says that God sent one last plague to show forth his power and to convince Pharaoh to release them and let them go free from this bondage. And it was the death of the firstborn of anyone whose house did not have the blood of a lamb put on the doorpost of the house. You see, when they left after God had caused the death angel to pass over their houses because of this blood that was applied to their house, it says that they didn't even have time to let the bread that they had leaven. And so during the celebration of the Feast of Passover that was commemorated this event, they were not to have any leaven in their houses. And since Jesus came as our Passover lamb, that caused death to pass over us because we've had the blood applied to our life in Jesus' name, baptism. We should all get the leaven out of our lives. And verse 8 basically identifies the leaven we must get rid of as ill will and evil. And Paul also lets us know that we must have the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth in what Morris identifies as in his commentary, which I've been leaning on heavily, as you can tell.